We hope you enjoyed yesterday's and are enjoying your experience throughout this week of NCA Virtual 2020. And feel free to let us know where you're watching from in the chat, and also feel free to submit questions in the Q&A for our panelists today. And so we have a good number of participants so far. We had almost 500 yesterday. We have a couple folks watching from Maryland, from Florida, Delaware, Utah, Jersey. Great, I'm from Jersey. Which part? Who is that?
You're supposed to ask which exit. Isn't that the standard answer for New Jersey?
That is, you're right. You're right. On the Parkway.
There you go.
Awesome. And just to open it up for any comments from the panelists, if you'd like to, any introductory comments here.
I mean, do you want us to go ahead and kick it off, Jonathan, and start it up? Because we can.
We're gonna just wait a couple minutes until we could start at 2, but if you wanted to add any thoughts about yesterday or going into today.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is important for everyone to do is to check out the Q&A tab. We are going to drop a link into the Slack channel that we've got going on, and that's a wonderful way to be able to stay in contact with us, or to ask these one-off questions that might take a little bit more time that we might not get to during the presentation. So I would check the Q&A tab. I think Jesse's dropping that in right now, but we'll drop it in a couple times during the presentation just for you to subscribe to that, and then we can always talk a little bit offline or at the end of the presentation for that.
Jesse, would you just mind explaining what Slack is? There's a few people asking when we mean by the word Slack. Thank you.
Absolutely. So what we are doing when using Slack is basically a professional communication channel that allows groups of people to communicate on topics that are not only of interest to them, but they are working on together. And the first thing that it does is it keeps your email from getting crushed with thousands of threads and trying to figure out who said what, when, and where. But it keeps everything on topic, and it's a great way to communicate. It's a great way to share, to ask questions, and especially in this time, it's a great way to build community and talk to other people who are going through the same things you are in their schools all over the country. Gives you a chance to kind of build your professional network. And frankly, it's a fantastic communications tool. So once you see and get around and kind of play around with it, it's really excellent. I use it for a number of different reasons, a lot of different purposes. And I think once you get in and start using it, you'll love it. And so just please join in and be part of the conversation. I'll be dropping the link in here in just 1 second.
So it's kind of like a grown-up Snapchat.
That's a great way to describe it, right? Great way to describe it.
We really enjoyed yesterday. It was a great day. We're so thrilled that so many people could join us online for our masterclass. Nick, Jesse, Anthony, and I have spent double down over the last few weeks to make this very special in the environment that we're all thrust into. And we hope you're getting some golden eggs every day and furiously scribbling things down. As the teams mentioned, all the assets, the slide deck will be available to you at the end of the masterclass, plus lots of extra treats and goodies, which the guys will explain along the journey.
Great. Well, we're just over 200 so far. So we can kick it off with a couple housekeeping notes here. Once again, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's masterclass, and we hope you continue to enjoy today's and tomorrow's as well. This webinar is being recorded, and an on-demand version will be available in about 1 to 2 days after this masterclass ends. There's lots of on-demand content currently available right now. If you want to continue your learning on your own schedule, just check out the NCA Virtual Digital Attendee site for that. You can interact with each other using the chat feature. You can direct your messages to the panelists or the whole audience using the small drop-down arrow in the chat box. Feel free as well to submit questions in the Q&A, and we encourage you to use that Q&A feature rather than the chat box for questions, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you would like a certificate of attendance, we encourage you to complete the session evaluation, which will be shared in the chat towards the end of the webinar. For those of you interested in a book purchase or book signing from one of our featured NCEA authors, you can do so in the NCEA store using the coupon code NCEA Virtual. We hope you've been enjoying all the opportunities for games and prizes, as well as the social media conversation. You can follow NCEA on Twitter at NCEA Talk, or search for the hashtag NCEA Virtual 2020. And before I pass it off to our panelists, let's begin, as we do all things, in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And now it's my pleasure to welcome back Nick Leroy from Bright Minds Marketing, Jesse Roberts from Admission Pro, as well as Anthony and Greg Campitelli from Inquiry Tracker. So thanks so much for joining us again, guys, and my pleasure to pass it off to you.
Hey, great, John. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for coming and spend part of your afternoon with us. As I look right now, it looks like we have about 256 people joining us. So really a big thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day. And I think it speaks to how many of us are concerned about enrollment and marketing in our Catholic schools. So as John mentioned, my name is Nick Leroy. I'm the president of Bright Minds Marketing, and joined today with Jesse Roberts of Admissions Pro and Anthony and Greg Capitelli of Inquiry Tracker. And what we all work with schools in enrollment. And so we put together what we think is a pretty darn good class that spans over 3 days that kind of talks you kind of all the way from the beginning to the end of enrollment for your school. So we structured this in 3 sections, really around understanding your opportunity, driving demand, and then getting results. So yesterday we talked about some of the foundational things about school enrollment marketing, really around understanding your customers, understanding what their needs are, and really understanding what they're looking for in a school, and then marrying that up against the unique selling proposition of your school. If you can match up their needs with what your school offers, then it's a great recipe for success. Okay? So that's a big foundational thing that a lot of schools sometimes skip over, but I guarantee you, if you go through the homework that we talked you through yesterday and spend the time doing those 2 things, it will make the rest of your marketing much, much more effective. So today is more around driving demand. And so Jesse Roberts is going to talk to us about how to raise the awareness of your school and attract more potential prospects to your school. Once you've identified these potential families, then how do you nurture them and create a relationship and engage with them in order for them to eventually come and engage with you in an in-person, or in this age of coronavirus, in more of a virtual way with your school? How do you move them along the enrollment funnel? So we'll cover those things today. And then tomorrow, we'll talk about how do you convert them into an enrolled student? And then once they're at your school, how do you continue to keep them happy? How do you change them from just an enrolled student to a raving fan and an advocate of your school? So again, we had about 500 folks yesterday. Looks like we have a really good group of people today. So just really excited to have you guys here. Thank you very much. Just a couple things we mentioned before. Some of you might not have got it because you joined a little bit late, but in the Q&A box, we do have a link to the Slack channel. Slack is a software application that allows us to monitor some of the comments, as well as respond to you after the session. So I'd encourage you guys to join that, or also submit your questions to the Q&A button on your Zoom console there, and we'll try to answer those questions during the presentation. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jesse Roberts, who's going to talk to us about raising awareness and attracting prospective parents.
All right. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. And let's jump right in. We have a lot to get to today. And typically, if you think about the continuum of what we're going to be doing today, we have several different segments in what I'm going to be talking about that could be full hour-and-a-half sessions themselves. So this is going to be, in many ways, drinking from a fire hose. But I think at the end of the day, we're really going to have a lot of fun with the content we're going to discuss today. So, what we're going to cover today is, kind of the big problem at the top end. We're going to talk about some digital methods, which are part of Pillar 2 from yesterday. We'll talk about the offline methods that people use for prospecting. We'll talk about budgeting, and then we're going to talk about return on investment measurement, or ROI. But first, just really quickly, just about me. I'm the owner of Admission Pro and Unbound 360. I am a recovering admission director. So I have been there and done that and bought the t-shirt. Working in Catholic schools, you buy the t-shirt. They don't give you the t-shirt, right? I was a Catholic school student, and I have Catholic school clients all across the United States. So I am in the trenches with many schools, kind of going through this new normal and trying to understand and help them solve their challenges. But really, the most important thing about this conversation today is I'm also a Catholic school parent. My daughter Cecilia is a sophomore at Notre Dame Prep here in Baltimore, and my son Tate will be attending Calvert Hall College here in Baltimore next year. So I am in the trenches on both ends here. I've just gone through the high school search process with them, so I'm intimately familiar with what's happening in the market, what people are doing, and how schools are interacting. So I've got a pretty unique perspective in terms of working with schools and also being on the other side as a prospective family. So I think I've heard every principal or pastor or principal or president say this of the past year or two, or even in the time when I was in the admissions seat. We need kids. We need more students in the door. We need more bodies. And that's great, and it's true, but it's not necessarily where we need to be, right? We need to have a different mindset. We talked yesterday about shifting our paradigm. And so that's what we're going to cover today. So we asked you a question in the survey that we sent out ahead of the masterclass. And we asked you, what tools are you using to help drive your awareness? Thankfully, 100% of you said that you're using your website, which is great news. 100% of you are using social media. Again, fantastic. When we got to SEO, or search engine optimization, that number dropped to 51%. And then when we started talking about lead capture forms, 64%, or even paid online advertisements, 59%. So there are some tools already that we can start to add to our tool set that can improve our results right off the bat for many of our schools. And you don't have to do a lot of work to get an effective campaign up and running and, quote, get the word out. There are some other options out there. We also asked you about using pixels, whether you're using Facebook pixels or other tracking devices, so that you can see how effective your campaigns are. And if only 11% of you are using them, there's a lot of, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table by not using technology like this. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. We also asked you about the makeup of your schools in terms of Catholic enrollment. And 51% of you said that 75 to 100% of your schools, the kids identify as Catholic, which is great. But the flip side of that is we have a very large number of kids that aren't identifying as Catholic that are in our schools and that we really want to serve. So, as we talked yesterday, and, Nick brought up, the difference between Catholic Kathy and non-parishioner Nancy, there's a big competitive market out there. And we want to make sure that as we're, raising awareness and trying to drive demand, that we're doing it in a way that is attractive to those public school kids, that deals with the competitive situation around us, whether it's the free public school down the street, or even when you're talking about schools that we don't necessarily compete with, but we want to be in the conversation with. Okay, so we really want to make sure that we are looking at the numbers in a way that makes sense. So when you think about marketing, it's really about messaging, right? And messaging matters. I think about messaging in a couple of different ways, but the easiest one that I like to talk about is Coca-Cola. Everyone knows, and that, you see that red swoosh, you know kind of what's going on there. But one of the things that's really interesting about Coca-Cola is that they change their messaging frequently based on who they're talking to. They don't have to do a lot of work on building brand awareness because everyone knows, who Coke is. But they're also doing things differently when it comes to introducing product. When Coke Zero was first introduced, it was designed to be what's called in the UK as bloke Coke. It's designed to be built for and targeted towards men. So a lot of the ads that they did early on were really targeted towards men and not as a quote diet drink. So, Coke is now doing a lot of things with reminder messaging, and they're doing things with competitive placement. And we need to be paying attention to that in the marketplace as well. We can learn a lot of lessons from the quote unquote big boys about how to make sure you're getting your message out into the marketplace. The media also matters as well. And when I think about, Catholic schools, and I think about the work that I did in the admissions offices, the offline media that we were typically kind of forced to use are paid, and they're pretty expensive, whether you're sending out postcards or mailers or your review books out in the mail, whether you're doing billboards. And I have nothing, I'll pause there. I have nothing necessarily against billboards, but I think when you're talking about return on investment, there are other ways that you can spend big dollars for impressions. We'll talk about that later. But I just wanted to draw an attention to a lot of schools think of billboards a great way to, quote, get the word out. But when you're talking about pure return on investment, it's not always the best use of resources. You've got magazines. I think there's still people that are able to go and drive information from a magazine, which is great. There's radio. I know in Baltimore, radio is big around open house season. And newspaper, of course, it's kind of a dying art now. But then there's the offline that are free, and typically that's going to be your church bulletin. The issue with the church bulletin, of course, is you don't have much access to non-parishioner Nancy. So what I'm encouraging you to start thinking about is using your existing data and looking at your existing student body to understand what your market is. You should have a really good idea of where your families are, and not just on a spreadsheet, right? And not just as a guess in terms of what neighborhood people are from, but you should know exactly where these families are. You need to know about your families and then connect that with your prospects. You should have a really good idea about how many kids are in your neighborhood that could be prospective families for you. That data is really important because that's going to help you to drive demand for your school. If you're going to use your word of mouth engine, and everyone agrees, word of mouth is going to be your best and most inexpensive form of marketing. You should know exactly where your families live in relationship to your prospects so that you can get that word of mouth engine moving right on the spot. So, at the end of the day, and you said, well, that's great. We take a picture and we have our clients in one space. This is an example of how this works. So I have a client at a school up in Rhode Island. We did some plotting of his existing student body. We went out and we found 13,000 families around the school that looked like their existing student body. They were matches in terms of who these people were. And by doing that kind of work, by understanding who these people were, driving some awareness with what we call an omni-channel approach. So it was doing offline, doing online, and building in some calls to action that we'll talk about later. We were able to turn that into $1.6 million in new tuition dollars for that school. So this kind of work is really important, and you have to think differently to get there. But at the end of the day, this is what's the difference between a school that's going to just make it and a school that's going to thrive and survive for the future. Okay. So when you think about online media, you have to find your audience. And frankly, this is the new normal, right? You're not going to grab a phone book anymore and start, scrolling through and looking for addresses or people that you know out of a list from the Archdiocese, right? That's not how this works anymore. So you need to be able to go and find your prospects so that you can build that awareness. There's a couple ways you can do that. There's obviously inbound marketing, right, which is doing blogs and social media, and there's also outbound where you're actually going out and finding them. So you need to be smart about how we go about doing that. And I want you to be creative. The idea that we all have to do the same thing, or we saw one school do something, we should do it too, that's great, but you need to be creative about this. And I think there's a number of different ways that we can go about building that awareness in the big picture. There's a lot of great new technology out there that will allow you to go and get families and go and get in front of people that make sense and go and get in front of people that are really your target audience. So I want you to be creative. I want you to be different and be true to who your school is. When you think about how advertising works now, it's ubiquitous. And I want us to be thinking in those terms as schools now, especially in the Catholic school market. How can we find ways to be in and be top of mind with people? You've got a billboard right now, and that's great, but everybody's stuck in their house and they're not driving. So how can we find other ways to be out in front of our prospective families? And at the end of the day, gives you the opportunity to start the conversation. So when you think about awareness, I look at it in terms of kind of an awareness continuum, starting with the yard sign, people putting ads in the local media, you get your website, pay-per-click advertising, social media, and then targeted and triggered marketing. And if you look at that kind of on the Business School 101 axis, where you've got personal on the y-axis and effective on the x-axis, I think about the yard sign as kind of down here in the lower left quadrant. Sure, you might get some information out there, but it's not really personal. It just lets you know, hey, somebody in this house likes, school X. That's great. Billboards they can be effective. They're not very personal, but they can be effective. True. Radio and TV, you're kind of moving a little further up, into personal, because you can start to do some more creative messaging that is persona based, as Nick talked about yesterday. You've also got your website, and I start the website in the center because this is a very important thing. Your website is your front door to the world, and your website needs to be the easiest thing to manage that you have. It also needs to be easy for new families to get in and find out information. Your website, especially the front page of your website, is not for information about when the bake sale is on campus. Your website should be about lead generation. It should be about helping new prospective families find out more to help get them involved in the conversation. So if you do that right, I put your website over here because you can be personal and it can be very effective. If you don't do that right, it's not going to be very effective because you're making a barrier to entry for families. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about that for the website itself. Social media can be very personal. It can be very effective, obviously. And I want us to think about targeted marketing in terms of understanding who we want to chase. This is what Nick was talking about with persona-based marketing, and understanding who we're talking about and getting information directly in their hands so that we can generate what's called triggered marketing and get people moving through the funnel. Remember, this is about persona, prospect, and process, okay? So a couple of quick points that I want to touch base on. We did an entire session last year, an hour and 15 minutes on video and storytelling at the conference. But just really quickly, when you think about video for what you're doing for driving demand, this is really important. You think about video quality, think about the message that you're sending out. I don't think you've ever seen the CEO of BMW stand in front of the plant with a shaky iPhone and talk about how many foot-pounds of torque the latest vehicle has, right? These videos and any content that you put out there as you're trying to drive demand have to be able to build your value as people view them, okay? Be unique. Don't be afraid to do something different. It doesn't have to be the same video that other schools do. Be short, 90 seconds, nice and easy, nice and short, and keeps people attention. And get that USP in there. Make sure that you let people know that in 90 seconds, you can give them exactly what they need to get to that next step, to make that demand come through. There's a tool out there, a free tool called Loom, and I'll put that in the resources as well, that you can use to send to any family in your prospect funnel, which is great. It's a quick little video, and it's a very personal way that you can drive demand. And obviously, we're going to have this more of this information in the Slack channel. There's a lot more detail here. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to drive demand and you're trying to build brand awareness, be true to the brand. Be true to the brand of who you are as a school, okay? Because at the end of the day, you need to build value. You need to have people understand that what you're doing at the school isn't just education. You're doing something with a little bit more purpose. And the Catholic school has that kind of purpose. It's really important that we tell that story. I don't have time, but I'm gonna post this link. This website, clongowes.net, is a boarding school in Ireland. They are a Jesuit school. The last 3 admissions films that they've put out have been simply stunning. They never directly say that they're a Catholic school, but at the second you look at it, it's fantastic. I'll post a direct link, but I wanted to make sure that you saw it here as something to go and take a look at. It really is a great example of being true to the brand, and their films drive a ton of activity into their funnel. I put this slide up because it's something I want you guys to think about when you're trying to build awareness and drive awareness. Whenever you're doing your storytelling, you're doing the same thing as a lot of other schools. So think about what you're putting out there in terms of bad storytelling bingo. And if your films, your collaterals kind of have all of these things in them, think about a different way to tell the story. This is the USP in making sure that you're doing it in a way that is it's congruent with your message and with what you're trying to get across. So have some fun with this. I love this slide. It's a lot of fun to kind of have some fun with. So inbound marketing, gated content. Right now, more than ever, parents are looking for guidance, right? Many parents are now teachers. So you need to be able to drive demand and build awareness by saying that you're not just, what we do is that we're Catholic, so what? All the Catholic schools are Catholic. What you need to talk about is what your school does better than anybody else, so that parents understand that you're going to be a thought leader in the market. Okay, they're looking for that great content to help them figure out who to talk to and which schools to interact with. There's a great link that I posted here from archbold.org, which is a guest blog about why a certain teacher teaches in a Catholic school. And what's great about that is it's got two purposes. One, it lets people know that Catholic schools have a lot more going on than just a great place to teach. It also is a great way to actually help recruit new faculty. So it's important there. And finally, when you're going to be a thought leader, make sure that whatever content you put out is connected to your personas. Don't just write a blog article. Make sure that anything that you write connects to directly and will resonate with the people that you're trying to reach with your personas. At the end of the day, some other thoughts right now for thought leadership. Your social media right now should be full of kids doing distance learning and having fun with it. Do you have pictures of a religion class doing Zoom? What's the message with all of that? When you think about building awareness, the big message is that the relationships continue at our Catholic schools. That's important. Learning continues. Our kids are getting what they need. And at the end of the day, you're building the brand of academic excellence. So if you're going to raise awareness, it happens here because schools see that you're walking the walk and talking the talk. In terms of process, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Process is really important when you're talking about building awareness, because you want people to get in and be able to jump right in right away and make sure it's easy. Okay. So, I want you to think about Amazon. When you get on Amazon's website, it's easy to use. Amazon lets you know right away what you're doing. And what's great is we want to make discovery enjoyable. Okay. We want to provide a call to action. Do the same thing with your site. When you're trying to build awareness, you want people to jump in right away and do something. So you want to make that experience special. You want to deliver on expectation, and you want to connect with the prospect on their terms. How many of you on your inquiry forms actually ask the parents what's the best way to connect with them? Text or email, right? Think about that. Make it easy for families to think about. At the end of the day, you want to build value, and that starts with how you treat people with that awareness, okay? Let's make it easy, right? Our websites are struggling with that. At the end of the day, marketing is a system designed around building relationship. Okay. Software is really important. And for many of you, you don't even have one person in your school who's dedicated to admissions. So we want to make sure that you are building that value and driving awareness as much as you can. If you use a tool like Inquiry Tracker, you've got the ability then to continue to use the platform to drive that awareness with families and keep them engaged. You're going to hear me use a term called call to action, or CTA. These are, buttons and items that you should have on every piece of collateral. And you typically see them as submit or join or learn more or enter. Here's an example of a school website, and right there, right and easy. Make it easy for people to apply. Inquire now, apply, and not go fill out a PDF form and print it out. Make it easy for people. Right? This is about a call to action that you can tie in. A call to action is a response to value proposition. It's connected to tools like Inquiry Tracker or HubSpot or Google Sheets. It's connected to your analytics, so you know what to do next. And at the end of the day, everything that you do, every piece of collateral needs to have a call to action to it to get people to move through your strategy. You want people to go to your next piece of content, to the next stage in the funnel. You want them to come to campus, to apply, to visit, to enroll. Don't be afraid to ask for that next step. When you think about a campaign, we were talking about a campaign that you want to get inquiries from zip code 08540. We've got a targeted email. We want to measure click-throughs. You're going to use a tool like HubSpot and MailChimp and Inquiry Trackle to track all of this. And it's going to be campaign specific. You're going to be list specific. And we want to have a targeted landing page. Please, if you take anything else away from this segment, don't have, come visit us at ourschool.org and leave it at that. You lose all of your potential tracking to see how effective your campaign is. Have it be ourschool.org/open house. So at least you know that you got people coming directly into a page on your site that you can track your results. Okay. When you think about this, you've got this sample campaign. Right now, this is a great opportunity because Google has the ability for you to jump in and you've got a great little ad here. But you can add a button to this that says text, and you can send up a text message right from Google so that people can get in touch with you right now. That's a call to action that drives people to jump in right away and start the conversation. Don't drive someone to the website, have them connect with you right away. Okay. You've got the ability to do some targeted emails based on where people are and target advertising based on their location. So at the end of the day, we want to think about being smart with our budget. Okay. Let's be specific. And we're talking about smart. So it's specific. And we're talking about, we want 50 inquiries from 08540 in October of 2020. Measurable. Those 50 inquiries can be tracked and accounted for. It's attainable. It's a goal that can be reached. It's realistic. The data that we have shows that there are at least 50 prospective families in 08540, and it's time bound. We know we're talking about October. We're not trying to stretch this into November, December. We're just talking about October. Okay, so we're being smart. And when you talk about the campaign, make sure it's focused, right? A campaign should be October open house or new families or public school families. When you think about that October open house campaign, then you've got some tactics underneath of it, like Facebook ads. You might do some triggered advertising from actual device behavior. And at the end of the day, you're looking for a specific goal. So this campaign is going to drive 30 prospective families into your open house. So you build a budget, and we're going to talk about return on investment or ROI. But at the end of the day, you've got $1,000 for your budget for October. We want to get people to view a 90-second video. 250 people click through it. So your return on investment or ROI for that CTA is $4. That's great. The ad that becomes an inquiry is $50. That's great. So then we give it a $20 ROI. And if that ad becomes an applicant, that's $200 for the CTA ROI. If that person enrolls, this is $333. But I don't want you to think about it from that perspective. $333, that cost of acquisition, turns into $10,000 of tuition for that student. In a K through 8 school, that's 9 years of tuition. So $333 returned $90,000 in total contract value. That's 270x in ROI. So we need to be smart about how we build our awareness to drive that kind of ROI into our funnel. So there's some takeaways. Think about your process a little bit more, how you put people in and how you use your process to drive awareness. Dive into your data, look at your market. You can do some mapping. You can understand where people live and look at your website. Do you have easy to use CTAs so that when you do drive people in, it's easy to start that process. We do have some homework. I'd like you to think about building a campaign and what would be one thing that you want to do for when things kick back off in the fall, whether it's an open house, whether you've got an event you want people to come to, great. We want you then to build content around that. So think about what blogs, video messages, what inbound marketing tools would you use, as well as what outbound marketing tools would you use. Think about the ROI for your last marketing campaign and apply that to this specific piece. There will be an ROI calculator, an Excel document that I have that I'm going to put in the Slack channel for prospecting, which I think will be useful for you if you haven't done this before, would like to have me kind of do all the heavy lifting for you, which I've already done. And there's also a great book out there called Waiting for Your Cat to Bark, which is about shifting your mindset when it comes to going out and chasing new families and raising awareness at your school. Okay. I think that we have some questions, but at this time I am, I think, right on time, and I will turn things over to my good friend Anthony. And I'll stop my share.
That was great. That was great, Jesse. Every time I see you do that presentation, I pick up yet something else. So it's pretty awesome.
Thanks. Thank you.
I've just got to get my right desktop up. Hang on for a second. There we go. Which one? Yeah, so you should be able to, do you see just the building relationships and nurturing leads slide?
We see both slides, Anthony. The current slide and the other. Why is it so important?
1 minute, just 1 minute. There we go.
That's better. That's much better.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm going to go, I've got quite a few slides I'm going to go through, but there's going to be some clear action items as we go, and we'll do a little bit of a poll throughout this session. The goal is, we originally called it like just nurturing leads, but the goal is, as Jesse was pointing out, and as Nick and Greg mentioned on day one, it's all about establishing relationships and do it in a very, in a trusted and a credible expert manner, right? Because what anyone looking for something, doesn't matter if it's a widget or a service, they're looking to get it from a trusted expert. And you do that by creating valuable storytelling content that positions you in that way. And when you were talking about having some of your teachers, like Jesse was talking about, writing about why I'm a Catholic teacher, that is the credible, trusted expert. So it's all about telling stories and building relationships. And we're going to keep talking about now, why is this more important than ever? Because the world has changed. There's no need for me to elaborate on the details of it, but the lifeline for every school, for every one of you on this session today is garnering future enrollments. And this is more important than ever. So one of the biggest ways that schools were getting their leads were school tours and personal visits to the facility where they can walk around, touch, feel, walk into the classroom. Well, right now that's not possible. And we decided that we wanted to, because we're doing this all remote, I wanted to make sure this session really provided you some tangible steps on what you can do in today's current climate, all right? So you really have to double down on your marketing, and you have to double down on your comms. You have to communicate out, and you can't do it in person, so you have to be creative. As Jesse said, you need to really start to think different and be really creative. These parents are still going to be choosing a school for their kids, whether it's remote or at some point they're going to be going back. But the thing that's super interesting is that the population, I know that most of the school staff tend to be time poor because they've got too much to do, which is why you have to rely on technology to help you do things. But people are now starting to move to more time rich. All families are now at home. They are watching their kids learn, and they are, this is why your brand is going to be super important. Greg's going to talk a bit about that tomorrow. But the leads are still going to come in. And the data I'm going to share with you is going to prove to you that they do come in, mainly will come in via your website, and especially if you run those campaigns. So speaking of the resources, we did in that survey, we asked, what is the average number of people that you have at your school that focus on marketing and mission? And unfortunately, it's sort of one or none, that's close to 90-something%, right? So the reality is that you're wearing multiple hats, and a lot of you are trying to do multiple different things. So all I'm telling you is you have to rely on technology to help you. There's no short way around it. You'll get more hours back in your day. The other thing that we asked was, how effective are you? Remember when we covered step one is attract prospects, what Jesse was talking about, then you nurture them, then you get them to take action. What do you want them to do? I want them to visit the campus. Then you want to convert them to enroll, and then you want to retain them. So that's sort of the standard life cycle of a student. And you're all sort of in the middle. You're all giving yourself probably a 3 and a 4 on average. You're not all up there at the top. But I will tell you that in the middle, when you talk about getting prospects to events, that's sort of gone away, because you can't have a physical event. So I'm going to talk to you about how you can continue to do that going forward. Greg showed you this girls' school, and you can see that there's girls in their uniform, they're all smiling and happy, and it sort of sends this has that emotional feel about it. But I want to ask a question. This is the first poll I'm going to do, and I'll ask my panelists just to moderate the chat. I'd ask you to answer this question. What is the goal of your website? Just type in what you think the goal of your website is. And then I'll get Jesse and Nick and Greg to sort of give me some ideas of what we're hearing.
Yeah, we're getting a good response here. Lots of people saying, a lot of people saying enrollment. A lot of people saying to give information. I think we just want to quickly address that. Just mindful we are coming up to 25 minutes.
Okay. Okay. So the actual goal of your website is leads. That is the number one goal that you should be focused on. Don't worry about the current families. Don't worry about the alumni so much. Focus on getting leads more than anything else. And our data has shown us that leads. So in Inquiry Tracker, we have hundreds of schools that use the product, which represents tens of thousands of students. And we know where the leads are coming in. We know how they're coming in. We know they come from 4 sources. Either they make a general inquiry, they request a view book, they schedule to come to an open house or school tour, and then they might do a personal tour, and then you try to get them to convert. They typically follow that sequence. The data that tells us is that 94% of those leads that come into your systems are through your website, online, somehow. Either they fill out a web form just to say, send me a view book, or they actually sign up to go to an event. And the trick is, if events have been taken away from you, there's a potential of 68% of your lead flow disappearing. You can't afford that to happen. And I'm going to take you through some real clear steps and how we take you through this this sequence to get these people to become raving fans for your school. All right, so the first tip I'm going to give you, and make a note, this will be in the takeaways, is make sure it's easy to find the right form on your website. Don't hide it. Don't bury it too deep. In fact, we recommend that you have a button at the top, view book or book a tour or, apply now, like we have on this sample site. The other thing I want to point out, one day you might have had a hero message with register for a tour. I encourage you to think about virtual tours, right? Tours should not stop. And I highly recommend that schools really consider running their own virtual tours using products like Zoom. So what do I mean by this? It's a great way for you to engage with your community, to show them about your school. You can still engage them by using email, phone, and regular mail. You have to use technology to personalize your emails. And you obviously are going to provide more educational content so they can make decisions. The trick is you want to capture the right information. So I'm going to ask you to focus on these 3 pillars when you're capturing information on your forms. You want to build your pipeline. So you need to know who the student is, what year they're starting at, what grade level they're starting at, and even ask their interests, because then you can start to target your marketing based on what they're interested in finding out. You obviously want to find out the parents' contact information. Maybe today you might also want their mailing address in addition to their phone and email. And of course, for analytics, like Jesse was talking about, you want to know where they came from and how they hear about you, so you know if your marketing dollars are also working. Limit which fields are mandatory, right? Just make it the key ones that you think are absolutely critical to get. I highly recommend you use data entry aids for accurate data collection so that you have consistent reporting. I'd also think about if your programs, your WOW programs that you offer at your school are unique differentiators, I'd think about adding them to your forms and see which students are interested in them, because then you can market to them also. And the last thing well, a couple more things. One is always ask if they've got siblings, because that one enrollment that Jesse mentioned could actually turn into 2 or 3 enrollments, all right? It's a lot more money, so your dollar can go a lot further. And then the last thing is if you want to know things about what school they're coming from, so you can know if they're feeder schools. These things will really tell you a lot about what you can do. But when you pull in all that information coming in, you got these different forms on your website, or they call up, or they send in an email. You have different team members that are tracking it, because remember, There's different ways that you store all this information. If you've got admissions, marketing, or reception, someone walks in the reception, they just make a note. And it could be stored in someone's inbox or their drawer or Google Docs. So we asked that question, where do you go about storing a lot of your prospective families? And really you can see it's a fairly even split between, you know, Google Sheets, paper forms, some sort of CRM system or other. And the other one I sort of worry about because I'm not too sure what that might be, but the problem is they're in different places. So the solution is we recommend to have a centralized database. You get one common system, all different staff members can access it, and then you can conduct more targeted marketing because you know what the student interest is. You know, if it's a girl who's interested in coding, then you can send the right sort of marketing material. So do you have a centralized database for your inquiries, right? The next thing is on the website, they're still going to make 2 inquiries today, your view book and the remote tours. Make sure you've got a form for each and make sure you're asking the questions. So now I'm going to walk you through a couple of sequences, one for each of those that are real tangible ideas for you to implement. So I highly recommend you do this when you get back to work as soon as you are able to. Make it easy for them to find the form on the website. Have a form with the right questions. We just covered those. The next thing is when they fill out that form, make sure they get an instant email saying, thanks for your interest. And it needs to be personalized, right? And Greg and I recommend that you stick with text. Don't overly format it into HTML because people just want to know they're communicating with a human, and you might be surprised at the sorts of replies that you get back. If you ask them for their mailing address, then you might think about sending a different version of your view book in the mail, or if someone was interested in coding, put in the coding literature that stands out. So you send that piece. This is a different form of contact. Then you might call them and have either a parent ambassador or a staff member call them, find out their areas of interest and concerns, and then invite them to a virtual tour, right? And then you can continue to email them maybe 10 days after the event. So this is a nurturing sequence that uses different modes of contact that allows you to establish this relationship with this family. The last thing I like to recommend is always use a conversational style and not too much corporate speak, all right? That's the other tip. So the goal traditionally has been for you to get a lead to visit your school. And I've heard some schools say, well, I can't because our school's closed. Well, yeah, you can't do on-site tours, you can't do personal tours, and most schools have no campus access. Now, when that comes back, that's great. You can turn them all on again, but you can do remote tours. You could do video tours, 360 tours, or live meetings. These are easy to access and they provide great overview. The cons with video tours, you can't interact with them really. You may not have one handy, but if you do, you should use it. But the community is really looking for interaction. So the 3 ideas you could use this tool from Google. We can drop this into the Slack channel. It's to allow you to create a virtual tour of your school. You could create a slideshow using PowerPoint or Keynote and turn that into a movie and share it. Or you could use a smartphone, keeping in mind the quality, but you can do a really good job with these videos. You don't have to say, oh, I've got to go buy all this video content. But a tip is consider having your students use some of these tools to build a tour for your school, and then you can go out on social media and promote it and get them to come to your school, right? So then we like to do virtual tours. A little like what we're doing today, it's a webinar, but a live virtual tour is more like a live meeting where you can have families come in and join and have a face-to-face conversation, whether it's a one-on-one or one-to-many. You could have your principal talk, your director of admissions talk. It really demonstrates you're accessible. And I've seen schools do this today, and it's working really well. So if you're going to go about doing a virtual tour, don't shy away from this. You have your form for a virtual tour. Sign up day 1, thanks for registering. They get the thanks for registering email, send them a calendar invite, and send them a Zoom link. So everyone in the US here has free access to Zoom in education. So you can use it to send meeting invites, and you can send a calendar invite as well. You want to send a follow-up email because you don't want them to forget to come. Like most of you got a follow-up reminder saying, hey, we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, you know, for the masterclass, etc. So you should follow these as best practices. And then on the day of the meeting, when you go to lunch and run your meeting, just like we did today, we want to be all brand ready, have an agenda. We go over some housekeeping items. You have someone run the meeting so you don't get distracted, and you have your principal talk. Start early, make sure you're prepared, and go over the housekeeping items with your audience. And of course, want to have a tool where you're checking who is coming into the meeting so you can follow up, doing a different type of follow-up response, right? And then the last thing is, after the meeting, if you have checked the families in to realize who turned up and who didn't come, send them the right correspondence after it. So thanks for coming to our virtual tour, or sorry we missed you. And then if they came, ask them to fill out a survey so you can learn more. Remember, always, everything you do should have a purpose. In this case, the call to action is fill out a quick survey. If they didn't come, you would say, hey, could you call us direct and let's set you up for a personal tour or another one-on-one meeting, all right? And then the last thing is, don't stop. Keep reaching out, call families. Then you can, after that, you could send out a piece of literature in the mail. So you're constantly doing that research for you. And then your options to do this is, you obviously could use something like Google Forms and send manual emails. It's affordable, but it can be time consuming, but it's free. You could implement a CRM and integrate with a mail service like MailChimp. Some of you do that. You probably know it's time consuming and can be quite expensive. And of course, you can use a product like ours, iInquiry Tracker, which is purely built to solve this very problem. In fact, we have schools using it to run their virtual tours today. We track all these, you have the funnel metrics. Yeah, you can check in families. It's usable by students. It really helps you portray your brand in a solid fashion. So your takeaways and homework, remember, make it easy to find those forms, put them in the header of every page. And I recommend you have one for a virtual tour today and one for your view book. Make sure you have a centralized solution to capture all those inquiries, right? Make sure you do some level of automation and follow up, because most of you are one or less with resources, so you've got to use technology. Highly recommend you run live stream virtual tours. And if you're interested, we are going to post, as part of the deliverables, we're going to post you some information on how to do those. And so make sure your homework now is go add those buttons, finalize the questions on your forms, and go off and pick a software platform to collect this data from the students, especially their interests, right? And automate using the email to really start to build those relationships with all those families. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. We've got, I think, a little over 10 minutes for Q&A. So I will stop my sharing and we can go into the Q&A mode.
Just while you're doing that, just while people are preparing their questions and for the group, teachers have people often talked about, how do I get my teachers to recognize they are representing our school's brand? They have stepped into the trenches now. Every parent in every home has the ability to see how their child is being taught. And if teachers didn't understand that they had a role in marketing before, they certainly have one now. And that's an easier conversation that the marketing and admissions folk can have with the principal to set down clear guidelines on that. Nick, I know there's a bunch of questions coming in that we haven't answered, and Jesse. So to folks, you want to sort of start chiming in and answering some of those questions that have been coming in.
So we have a number of folks who are saying, what is a view book? What do you mean by that? And the easiest way to describe a view book is it's essentially a publication that a school might do that is a marketing piece that describes the school in a little more emotional way than just a folder with paper in it. Tells some stories, gets people interested in the school, lots of photographs. It's basically something that you would present that is a marketing prospectus for your school. Many people in the school world are kind of moving towards a digital version of that and not so much print. There's a couple different, I would say, perspectives on that. I'm sure, Nick, you're seeing some of your clients kind of in both ways with that. I've seen schools do really elaborate ones. I've seen schools put out a little 8-page book that basically is, here's why we're great and here's why you need to come spend time on our campus. So anything you want to add to that, Nick?
I'm sorry, I was answering a question on the.
I can add one comment on the view book stuff, and that is, when you think about what you put online, don't necessarily think about it has to be the same as what's in print. Think about being different, and also if you ask the right questions on your forms, I'd assemble a pack of materials that's relevant for that family and put a handwritten note in there from the principal or something to make it personalized. People love that, and even down to how you write the name and address on the front of the envelope. Consider handwriting it rather than, I got to print out a mailing label. I know it might be more work, but it really shows that you care and it's personalized, and you're going to a lot more effort than maybe other schools do.
A couple of questions around how do we do check-in for open houses, and this is not supposed to be a flagrant press for people to start using Inquiry Tracker, but Inquiry Tracker does all the system that Anthony's just described in terms of automated emails, pushing everything into a centralized database, personalizing those emails back out, and doing all your check-in for open houses. We're happy to do a presentation on an Inquiry Tracker if anyone wants to contact us directly, and Jesse and Nick will put up all the relevant email contacts that we can provide tomorrow at the end of the session. There's about 9 minutes to go, folks, so stay on. Lots of questions to get through, lots of comments people are making. It's hard to keep up with all of them. There's a lot coming through. Jesse, Nick, Anthony, do you want to answer a couple of those ones that are, or comments that are coming through, folks?
Yeah, so let's see. There's some folks who are talking about how to deal with how do you heavily market. Public schools didn't start remote learning till last week. So I've heard this from a number of different people. I think you can do it in a way that kind of plays nicely in the sandbox and doesn't say, the public schools messed this up, but you can say something like, we've been focused on the mission since day one. Our kids are moving forward. We're focused on the future, and we're focused on keeping our kids on path and on task. So I think there's some ways that you can tell the story without kind of offending or knocking down those folks in the public school world as well. And don't be afraid to tell the stories about how far your kids are ahead, as well as what amazing things are happening inside of a wall-less classroom. I think that's actually pretty cool stuff. Let's see.
Number one, while you're coming up with that one, the number one key to success for us is people do not want to be treated as a giant cohort. I've been an admissions director, and I was guilty of saying the incoming grade 7 group. Families don't want to be treated as an incoming grade 7 group. They want to be treated as families and know that you know what their anxieties and concerns are. And do you know what my interests are? And if you know that, you can have a conversation. There's lots of conversations to have. It can be challenging, but if you know if your interests align with your offerings align with their interests, then conversion soars.
So we had somebody ask to see the bad storytelling bingo slide again. Whether that's for humor, which is great. I will certainly throw that back up on the screen here.
One of Jesse's favorites, that one.
Yeah. So the big thing with this, and it's not to kind of poke fun at anybody necessarily, but I know that I've worked at schools that was guilty of a lot of these things. But typically the big takeaway from this is, if these are things that you're putting in your stories, whether they're videos or pictures on campus, that's what everyone else is doing. You need to think about a way to be unique, to be different, and to make sure that you're telling the story of your school in a way that resonates and doesn't feel like every other school. So that's kind of the whole purpose with this slide, as well as having some fun with it. So, and this slide will also be available in the main slide deck that you guys have. So you'll have a chance to give your marketing teams a hard time about this one as well.
What we've got right now is a whole bunch of people sitting at home, starting to run out of what to do. And they've got a computer. They're going to go to your website and start looking and poking around, because they have to still decide where their kids are going to go to school next year and the year after. We've moved, right now, the whole world's population has moved from time poor to time rich, possibly for the first time in their lives, or most of us have. So this is an interesting thought here. So people are checking your school out right now. And what's their experience?
There was another question there about we know word of mouth is very important, but do you have any advice for training parents or alums on what you want them to say or not to say. We know what they mean well, but sometimes they're the ones that give out misinformation. So one thing I'll share, I know Greg's probably got some ideas and the others, but is that one of the things we recommend is use your current students to gather data for you. If you're going to conduct a survey, and Greg will talk about the types of surveys to do tomorrow, have your students analyze the data and share the results. And what will happen is the parents will find out that their kids are actively involved in steering the direction where the school's going and making changes. Have students do a tour of the facility and write up a report. And what will happen is that word will start to spread and get out. And they'll talk about them differently, so how our kids are being involved in the day-to-day operation of the school, not just in education, because they often the ones that emotionally respond to, well, this is what it's like at the school. You know, I like this teacher, I like that teacher. But having them involved is another way for getting good commentary out in the market.
You know, one of the other things, and Kristen, that was a great question about word of mouth. One of the things that we struggle with is we expect people to deliver our messages, and we just expect them to organically know what they are based upon their experience at the school. You know, and you see this a lot with social media, is oftentimes schools are just posting the happy pictures of the second grade class or things like that. There's very few branded messages that come out in social media for parents to hold on to that fact and then share that. You know, we never talk about the quality of our teachers, the educational level, or the all the other stuff that we're doing that is outside of that own parent's experience. So the more that we can be more directive in our social media posting and not just talk about what happens every day at the school, but more brand messages, more reinforcement of that USP, the better our word of mouth will be. Word of mouth is great, but word of mouth does not mean do nothing and hope parents are saying good things about your school.
Yeah, I agree, Nick, that people at the biggest schools I've worked with the most resources say, oh, but when I ask, why did you select our school? They say word of mouth. And they kind of shrug their shoulders and say, hey, all my marketing's not working. Nonsense. Word of mouth is an outcome of the great work you are doing. No one chooses a school because, hey, your great website, I chose your school because that fantastic billboard I saw down the street. Or, hey, that Facebook ad campaign was so inspiring. I'm going to choose your school because of it. No, they are the prompters, the reasons. I might go and do a school tour. I might go and have a chat with that principal. That fosters word of mouth. And that's what they tick when you ask them.
You know, Greg, a question I always ask schools when I work with them is I say, okay, what's your greatest marketing vehicle? And they say, it's word of mouth. I'm like, wonderful. So tell me exactly what you're doing to create word of mouth.
Absolutely.
And then it gets real quiet. So again, word of mouth done right takes work. Okay. So you can't depend upon just people having a good experience and saying those things. You actually have to work and communicate to them to get them to say your message back to you.
Here.
There were a couple of questions that came in, and by the way, you guys are spot on. I have nothing else to add because you just did it perfectly. There were a couple of questions that came in about finding lists and doing targeted advertising and doing some of those things. That's an hour and a half session on its own. I would encourage you to please jump into Slack and start the conversation there. It'll be in the prospecting channel, and we have a ton of resources to give you guys to look at with that. And I'll also throw the Slack invite one more time into the Zoom webinar chat for anybody who needs it before we are summarily ended with our session.
Yeah, John's on there. He's waiting to pull the.
I know. He's got the shepherd's hook out, Nick.
Hey, we still got 2 minutes.
I tell you, folks. Well, he is ruthless. This Jonathan. I tell you.
Yeah, and John, just based upon the questions that we're seeing in the Zoom chat and also the Q&A, maybe a follow-up session on us doing proper word of mouth marketing might be something that's appealing to folks at the NCEA.
Great. Yeah, we'd be happy to do continuing the education flow as well.
And just on that, look, Nick and Jesse and Anthony are going to put up our contact information tomorrow. We are happy to continue this conversation after NCEA anytime. The four of us work very closely together, and all our contact details are going to be there. All your assets are going to be there. Nick's just Jesse's just put up the Slack channel again. Maybe we can do it one more time, Jesse, just make sure that everyone can join that. I think there's about 250 people have already joined. So join the conversation. We'll be joining it right now after this session. So pop in onto Slack if you got time.
And tell your colleagues to jump in for tomorrow's session, because we got another day of great content for you. So don't be shy. Get more folks involved. This is important stuff.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. It's great to have you on again. Everyone, we hope you enjoyed day 2 of this marketing masterclass. Please come back for the final session tomorrow. And please, as our presenters noted, join the conversation in the Slack channel afterwards. We encourage you to complete the survey evaluation. You can find a link to that in the chat box right now. And after that, you can receive a certificate of attendance for this masterclass. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of NCA Virtual. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers.